They were almost there. In the back seat, Anson and Greta worried. This was the first time they were visiting Grandma. The first time they weren't going to be home for a weekend. First time they'd be away from Mom and Dad. It's not that they were afraid of being away from the safety of their parents and their rooms and toys. They were afraid of Grandma. They both heard the same stories from their cousins. Mom sat in the passenger seat. Her hands rested on her extended belly. Dad drove too fast. Any speed was too fast. Anson wished his dad would turn around or the car would break down, anything to stop this trip. Greta, she wished Grandma would die. And then there was Mr. Grace. According to the stories their cousins told them, Mr. Grace was just as scary as Grandma. This Mr. Grace guy, he helped Grandma with chores. Tears started to well in Greta's eyes. They turned off the main road onto the winding one lane that led to the little house. "Is there even room there for us?" Greta asked, not for the first time. Dad sighed. "Yes, Pumpkin. Don't worry. Mr. Grace will let you feed the horses." Anson tensed up as he saw the house through the brush ahead. He looked over at his little sister. He reached over and held her hand. She was trying not to cry. "It'll be okay," Anson whispered to her. "We'll stay together." The car stopped in front of the old house. The house looked like no one had ever lived inside. Mr. Grace, dressed in black, walked around the house towards them. Grandma appeared on the front porch, smiling. "Mom," Dad said, "how are you feeling?" "A little tired, but I'll get through. How's the baby?" Mom rubbed her stomach. "Almost there." "Good," Grandma replied. A little too slow, a little too scary. "And my little morsels of sweetness?" Anson and Greta stuck together by the car. "Well, say hi to your grandmother," Dad told them. Greta kept her gaze to the ground. Anson muttered something that resembled a greeting. "Charles," Mr. Grace said. He shook Dad's hand and they and Mom talked for a minute. Anson then realized his parents hadn't packed any clothes for him and his sister. Were they supposed to wear the same thing until Sunday evening? Before he could ask, Mom and Dad were saying goodbye to him and Greta. Anson and Greta stood strong even when their parents drove away, even when Mr. Grace stepped in their line of sight. The old man looked at them, chuckled once, and walked back around the house. "Come on in, sweets," Grandma offered. "It's getting dark and I'm getting hungry." Greta grabbed Anson's hand. They slowly shuffled up the steps and onto the porch. From the back of the house, suddenly came a horse's neigh, then a loud slurping. The two children ran into the dark house. The door slammed shut behind them. Greta began to cry. Anson wet his pants. Grandma stood in the living room, her arms stretched wide, her fingers fanned open, white tentacles sliding out from her nostrils, mouth, rear, and vagina, snaking out toward the children, enveloping them, yanking them towards her. Slurp. Mr. Grace came in through the front door. Grandma was on her knees in the middle of the room. The kids' clothes were to the side of her, all wet with clear goo. Grandma burped. "You couldn't wait for me?" Mr. Grace asked. Grandma shrugged. "I was starving." We can't afford to keep paying rent, Sarah told her husband. And we can't afford a house. Let's move then, Gio replied. We'll move someplace cheaper. You can transfer, and I'll stay home and watch Nellie like before. Moving costs money. Money we don't have. Besides, I want to buy a new car. Gio leaned back and ran his hand through his greasy hair. I don't know how we're going to make this work, Sarah continued. It'll work, Sarah. It's worked so far. For once, she was silent. After a few moments, she said, Are we still going to Disney World this weekend? She couldn't move her arms or legs. She couldn't see. The last thing Sarah remembered was driving home from her job at the bank. Her hands were tied behind her back. Her ankles, too. Even her big toes were tied together. She had something over her eyes, something sticky and sour-smelling. Tape. Over her mouth, too. She screamed into the gag until blood filled her head. Cold hands grabbed her bare feet. How much would you pay to save your daughter's life? The voice was deep and monotone. She thought he sounded familiar, but when she tried to search her memory, her concentration withered like her nerves. How much would you pay to save your husband's life? Something sharp ran across one of her soles. The sensation shot up her leg and beelined for her brain. No, she whimpered into her gag. Her plea wasn't clear, but she knew that the man got the point. She hoped. Let me go. How much would you pay me to stop? Another swipe across her soul, then the other one, faster, harder, over and over. Her muffled laughing began to make her throat raw. The man didn't stop or say anything for a few minutes. Sarah thought it was hours. It doesn't make sense, does it? He asked to her relief, stopping his assault. No, it doesn't. He scratched up and down her feet again. Her brain railed against the torture. He needed to stop, now. She peed her dress pants that she bought last weekend. Please, she thought she said. I know how much money you have. It's not enough to save your life. It's not even enough to save your family's life. But I never cared about them. In fact, I don't even care about you. He kept raking her soles, then the tops of her feet. It seemed his fingers couldn't move fast enough for his liking. Your freedom, if I cared, would have cost you an arm and a leg. At this point, Sarah re-envisioned her life path, taking the other road as far as she could imagine it, trying to get farther and farther than her current place in time. He dug his fingers under her tight armpits. But there are other methods of payment. If I cared. Sarah, you home? Gio set Nellie down and went to the bedroom. The closet door was open. Sarah's side of the closet was bare. Sarah? She should have been home by now. He checked the bathroom, then went into the kitchen. Stuck to the fridge door was a small piece of paper. His hands were shaking too much, so he let the note be as he read it. I can't do this anymore. I'm not living the life I want. I'm sorry. Sarah. Gio couldn't believe this. He thought it was a joke. It was her handwriting on the note, but she was joking. He didn't want to process how this could have happened. He didn't want to think of life without his wife. He didn't want to raise his daughter alone. Suddenly everything else, a new home, the upcoming vacation to Disney World, it all didn't matter. He just wanted Sarah back. Dad. Gio forced himself to look down at the 4-year-old. She held out something small to him. "What's that?" he asked. He squatted down, saw what she was holding, and screamed. It was a toe. The blood was dry, crusted over, but he could tell it was a toe.